Hey, what's up, everybody? Ryan Hamrick here. Welcome back to branding class. We're going to be looking today at some of what I'm calling extracurriculars, if you will, that are outside of the day-to-day branding work that I'm working on. That this class was kind of initially conceived of to kind of cover the process of, but as really kind of the only design focused person in the entire district. Well, not the only person focused on design, but the only person whose skill set is focused on design, I guess I'll say. A lot of people on my team especially are very focused on what things look like and all that. So my team is awesome and they support me big time and kind of injecting myself in all the conversations around all things visual and creative and everything. So that's been really awesome. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are outside of actual school branding that I'm working on day to day. I've got a little friend joining me here. This is my cat Lasso. Hello, buddy. Yeah, come on over there. So we're going to look at some of those things that are outside of the scope of rebranding and branding school campuses in the traditional sense, high schools, middle schools, whatever. There are also a lot of new facilities and stuff that are being built or need design work happening, need to be branded and things like that. So that, since I've started there, has largely fallen to me. So we're going to look at some of that stuff and take a look at some of that broader range of things that I've been working on design wise for the school district. And so, with no further ado, let's jump on into it. I'm going to come over here to my desktop here. I've got this file open, which no judgments on my artboard management here, okay? But this is the file that I started out playing around with the design for a new facility that is kind of like, in a lot of ways, a very cutting edge, like first of its kind type of facility. This is for what has been named the Compass Center, and also kind of like its corresponding building that's sort of connected to it on the same grounds for sure. That is called the Instructional Materials Center. And the things that they do, it's kind of like a warehouse sort of space on that side where they kind of house a lot of different like science kits and some textbooks and stuff, just like a bunch of things that will be super helpful to have that space for storing those things. And the cool thing about this property, this new campus, if you will, that's been built up, is that the grounds that it was built on was kind of historically populated by a lot of peacocks. So they've kind of embraced that internally as like kind of like a symbol of what they do and everything. And one of the focuses of the Compass Center side of things is it is our brand new facility for what they call the 18 plus transitional services department, which is essentially a school of its own, alternate school for special programs and stuff for helping kids that are kind of in that same range as high schoolers, and kind of helping them transition to their next stage in life. And so this is kind of a purpose-built campus for them that will have all kinds of things like a kind of a apartment space for learning all kinds of things just around living on your own and supporting yourself, and it's really cool. So because of the peacock thing, they incorporated all kinds of things with the carpeting and the paint colors on the walls, and even some wayfinding things that are really cool. Really a lot of accessible stuff as well. And they've really incorporated a lot of these kinds of blues and greens and very peacock-like colors throughout the building. So I borrowed a lot of that to kind of start playing around with what some things might be helpful to kind of convey this kind of peacock reference while also embodying the compass center naming. So kind of started in here playing around with some peacock-like shapes and seeing what I could get to as sort of the essence of what a peacock feather is in a way that would be nice and minimal and kind of and good for patterning and things like that, but also still kind of immediately recognizable as it referencing a peacock and not just being too abstract. So this here actually was an early attempt at using some text to vector firefly generation over here. So just to kind of like see where it would start me off, basically. We can see some of the different iterations that this went through here. Let's see. Let me get this one here. It's kind of cool. Very colorful. Little colorful for a brand, of course. So I kind of kept pushing and started to minimize what was going on there. Okay, getting a little closer. And let's see here, what else we got? Yeah, getting there. And then whatever my prompts were got a little too minimal. It starts to feel less like specifically peacock feather there. Super minimal. But this kind of gave me some ideas for sure and kind of started me off on the path towards what I ultimately wanted to do. So yeah, some good ideas there, right? But none of those really were kind of capturing the minimal sort of abstracted representation of the peacock feather and like the eye of the feather quite like I was wanting to. This was an example or an experiment in trying to do something that was a little bit more realistic with this shape, kind of a little truer to the idea or like the structure of an actual peacock feather. And I was playing around with a lot of different things with sort of this fanned, feathered kind of shape to where I could maybe use something like that to represent some feathered things and whatnot. Also played around with some of the patterning that peacock feathers naturally have, and that was very interesting and got a little little crazy. I was taking some of these sort of minimal peacock feather eye representations and putting them into this wild, radial pattern that their feathers naturally somehow take on, which is wild to me. But so yeah, so once I started playing around with some of those things, I started thinking, okay, how can some of these sort of do dual duty and also represent sort of that, it's going to be named the Compass Center. Our district branding is primarily a gold compass rose, right? So our tagline is leading to a bright future, all that kind of stuff. And so this Compass Center, while it's not necessarily like a direct thing where we want to like pull directly from the district branding, it needs to be its own thing. But it's kind of referencing that same spirit of the compass rose. And so I started thinking of a few things. First thing that came into my mind before I even started playing around in this document at all was the idea of these peacock feathers kind of fanned out, and where they overlap or intersect, how that could very naturally create this sort of compass rose shape. And so I started playing around with that to see what way I liked that best. This I really liked a lot. However, if you're familiar at all with NBC's peacock logo, I couldn't get away from the fact that it felt very similar and probably too similar to get away with really going super far down that path, as much as I may have liked it and as different as it was color-wise and everything. So I tried playing around with kind of abstracting those feathers a little bit as well to take away some of the roundness and get away from that NBC feel and more towards something a little bit more geometric. And obviously circles are geometric, but something a little bit more clean lines and less curvy. And I really did like this sort of monolinear representation of the peacock feather eye shape. So we were getting there. I really liked those, but then this is kind of what I had in mind too, was this sort of overlapping, but then you got to deal with things like, okay, do I want to have this much color in here? This particular one was created by lowering the opacity of these individual shapes, right? So that where they overlapped, it was stronger on the color. And so then you have to think about, okay, for this brand identity, do I want shapes that are, less than 100% opacity with transparency going on in there? It can work. It can be really cool, but it can also present some problems and stuff, especially in cases like this where you're going to ultimately be turning these over at the end of the day to people that are going to use them and not always include you in the ways that they're used or ask for your help in applying them to different things. So I wanted to try and avoid doing anything that was too complex and too particular in how it would be used because of those reasons. So while I liked that, and while that was kind of like the more pure representation of what I had in mind, I kind of moved on from that. Started doing some of these outline things, did this one as a little bit less of a like purely squared off idea. Did the round idea, but kind of broke them up a little bit to kind of isolate this compass rose section here and kind of like add a little bit more focus on that. And then I started doing some other things. I started playing around with some of that fanned shape idea in between these things. I really like this one, but again, I created this one with transparency on these darker spots on this darker background. So again, like how many colors do I really want to introduce and that kind of thing. I really did like this version of these feather shapes, very unlike an NBC peacock type logo. Has that minimal shape. The colors work really, really well, and I think kind of really convey that peacock reference there with a shape that's not necessarily like super obviously peacock feather. But again, the complexity of this was like a little bit more than I was ultimately going for. So I started playing around with some other ways of representing this compass side of things, because ultimately, without the entire 4 to 8 points of the compass, and it only being half of it, it starts to feel like, okay, maybe is it a plant or something, like a little agave type thing, whatever, which is cool, but not what we were going for in the reference there. So I started thinking about, okay, what if I break away from this more fan style, NBC style, fanned out feather sort of approach in the way that this was laid out, and started to think about, okay, maybe we go for more of the compass rose shape and orientation of it actually being, north, south, east, west, that kind of thing. But instead of it being, just kind of the points of a compass rose, it's those peacock feathers. So instead of being in a true peacock orientation, it's more in the compass rose orientation, right? So I started thinking about ways that we could do some of that. Kind of simplify these shapes, made them a little bit more of that kind of, four-sided little diamond type shape. And kind of like in inverse of what a compass rose typically is, but it kind of overall creates this sort of square shape, which is very neat and tidy and good for things like patterning and stuff, obviously, right? So then I started playing with different ways of representing those eye shapes in there. do we want to just round that out, kind of go back to like that NBC peacock style, but kind of breaking away from that, arrangement wise, and making it this compass rose orientation. So like that, kind of like the moon shape there. Jack brings over a question from Behance: how much research do I do before branding? It's a really, really good question. And the brief answer is as much as I possibly can, right? And how much you can vary from project to project, right? Sometimes you're building something for yourself even, and there's it's kind of like you're going purely on your personal taste and what your own goals are and all that. So maybe less research goes into that unless you're specifically referencing something like a peacock feathers and stuff like that. And so that can be a little bit more minimal on the research side. And in the other direction, if you're, say, doing a rebrand of a company, or in my case lately, a school that their logo has been around and in use for like years and years and years and has a lot of brand equity in there, then you really need to do substantially more research to understand all of the things about that company or that organization's brand that are important to all parties involved, right? To the people that are a part of that company or that organization, that school, to the audience of theirs, whether that's their customers or whether it's their students and the families of them. And just see, you want to find out everything you can about what is important to them, what they love about it, what is going to be sorely missed if it goes away from that particular brand, right? And that's all before you even start thinking about, researching your inspirations and references, or, kind of the structure of something that you're wanting to convey or represent in the brand that you're creating, right? So it really all depends, but I always try and do as much research as I can in whatever areas are needed to really understand what it is what the goal is that I am trying to achieve with this brand. And so you really kind of take it case by case, and it never hurts to know as much as you possibly can about anything that you're trying to achieve or create. So great question. Love that. So coming back to this guy here, I came here, I really started to like this sort of crescent moon type shape that was referencing the peacock feathers. And this peacock feather is a great example of something that I ended up having to research quite a bit, because you feel like you have an idea of what something looks like a lot of times in your head, and then when you go to try and draw that or recreate it in some way, you find that you had much less of an understanding of what that actually looked like than you thought you might have. And the peacock feather was definitely very much in that category of things for me, where as I started to look at actual photos of them and everything, it was clear that I didn't know what was going on there. And so, like, for instance, with this guy, I pictured it much more like an actual eye, like a set of concentric circles, but really it's got this very consistent shape on, like, across every single feather wildly, that is this sort of I almost think of it like it's kind of like a 90-degree rotated Pac-Man shape, but rounded off, or kind of looks like it might be like a fortune cookie or something like that. And this is much more like what they actually are. They're in this larger circle that is usually almost like a perfect circle, but it's also offset upwards in that circle. And then it's in kind of this overall egg shape as you go to the next level. And so this is not at all what I had in my head when I started thinking about this, right? So something like this was only arrived at by really looking at photos and finding that it was much more like this. So this idea here while I made this after looking at a lot of those photos and stuff and seeing that kind of Pac-Man fortune cookie shape in there, I kind of arranged this a lot more in the way that this pattern existed in my head, which was like these very concentric circles, right? And kind of a simple shape that was kind of far from the actual reality of what these things look like in real life, right? So in learning a lot of that, I started to figure out other ways that I could abstract that kind of pattern and that those simple forms and how I could kind of find the essence of them. And again, I tried to kind of use this crescent moon or, version of that peacock feather eye and arrange them in that wild radial pattern that they are actually found in real life, around different things, different compass type ideas, right? One of their sort of concepts from their previous branding was the compass rose, but it was kind of focused particularly on the true north, in kind of referencing the way that they are guiding these kids as they kind of transition from school life to being out in the world. And so kind of played with that a little bit there, and then started just playing with other ways that these feather-like shapes could be more detailed, more simple, rounded, not rounded, and how I might want to orient them to kind of create this look that I was going for. I took some of this fanned feather pattern and tried to build the compass rose or a compass rose strictly with them, that kind of stuff. And then I started to arrive at what ultimately was going to be the direction that we went in. So I started playing around with things like this, where that kind of fanned approach of individual strokes was oriented into compass rose type shapes. And then I started thinking, okay, maybe instead I'll combine some of these ideas here with those fanned feathery ideas and come up with something like this. So I've got that overall kind of like 45-degree rotated square shape, good for patterning and everything. We've got that kind of fanned feathery sort of referencing shape in there. We've got the peacock eye in there, right? And we're ultimately creating this compass rose here. So I started playing with a few different options on that, kind of taking out some of the detail in the eyes of those and, just leaving it with this round, these concentric circles in there to kind of like, in conjunction with the color, kind of convey that peacock reference without being quite so heavy-handed of like the extra detail of that there of the eye. And so I started putting those things together and changing some of the shape and sort of the the relative proportions of everything, because some of the feedback that I got earlier on is that this looked a little bit too cross-like. So, it's, with a school or any kind of government related thing, right? Ideally, you want to stay away from any religious references, things like that, and keep those kind of things separate. So that was important feedback. We want to reference a compass rose, but in reality, that can very easily be very close to a cross type shape, and to a certain subset of people definitely read as that more quickly than others, for sure. So instead of doing it that way, I started to play with some of the proportions a little bit to make these fan shapes as kind of like that secondary direction part of what would be that compass rose reference. Make those a little bit larger and more equal to the primary parts, and make these feather parts here a little bit less skewed towards that kind of diamond shape and more like a what was it, parallelogram, right? So it kind of brings it a little bit more in line with a compass rose type of shape, and less in that kind of like Celtic-y kind of cross orientation and proportions, right? So everyone was really liking that, and then we kind of brought that over to figure out some options for type stuff. And this was a thing that I wanted to definitely make sure that there was a lot of tie in here, because like I said, there was this building was being built, and it was going to be right next to and even joined with this other building, this Instructional Materials Center. They would have different names. They each have different namesakes, actually. The Compass Center being named after Denise Geiger, a very prominent kind of founder of this transition program in Leander ISD, and the other being named after Linda Lippy, who was kind of like the first to initiate putting together these science kits and stuff for kids to make it easier for kids at different campuses to access some of those materials and stuff. So those things are very cool. They kind of separate them, but then they are going to be nearly attached on the same grounds, right? The same grounds that, these peacocks roamed on for a long time before this came around, right? So I wanted to make sure that they tied in with each other as well. So I wasn't only thinking about the Compass Center, which I really liked this kind of simple combination of the sans serif and serif typefaces, and I figured the best way to tie those in together would be by the use of color, and then also these type selections and the lockup of the naming, right? So as I was putting those together, ended up with this guy here, Compass Peacock logo, and the Denise Geiger Compass Center. And we haven't looked at any of the illustrations that I was working on for the Instructional Materials Center yet, and we'll look a little bit closer at those here in a second. But I've got the Linda Lippy Instructional Materials Center laid out in the same fonts and the same type of orientation, because while these aren't necessarily purely connected in any kind of functional way as far as what they do day to day and things like that, they are, like I said, in the same place. They, both have a namesake, so there's a lot of parallels here, right? And so at the end of the day, because these buildings are nearly connected, and I say nearly because they're not physically connected, but they share like a breezeway for their entrances, and their entrances literally face each other under that covered space. So it's kind of connected by their entryway, if you will, even though it's kind of open. So as you're going into one of these facilities, you'll walk basically right in between them, and then you're going to see one on one side, one on the other. So I wanted them to have some parity as far as the designs go, and have them feel like they were kind of like of a piece. Another question coming in from Behance: have you studied the branding of IKEA anytime? Man, studying it would be an overstatement, I feel like, but I've been a longtime fan of IKEA, from the furniture years and years back to, as a poor family, just starting out, my wife and I and our kids, when we lived in Pittsburgh. That was our first time being close to an IKEA. So like they had affordable furniture that was easy to build and easy to get. And that was all super helpful to us at the time. And it also just, looked really good. And then, as far as their branding goes, I definitely came to appreciate that more over time as I started to learn more about these things and care more deeply about those. But, yeah, I mean, that European and, Swedish, Scandinavian kind of, design is super, clean and minimal often, and kind of just ticks all the boxes for me for sure. So big fan of it. Haven't really studied it per se. So definitely something that I would be into for sure. So anyway, we've got this instructional materials center branding here too. And I wanted these to, again, like look good alongside each other, right? So you've got the same colors in use, of course, you've got the same fonts in use and the same approach to these name lockups. Also, I don't know, I tried to represent some of the different types of things that would be in the instructional materials center, what would be stored there, right? Textbooks. They're not going to store apples there, obviously, but it's an instructional thing. So it's something that is great for illustrative purposes and something that kind of really gives it that tie into education and instruction, right? Apple for your teacher and whatnot. And then this beaker back here. And some of the feedback that I got there was that it was really kind of more so a focus on those science kits that really kind of started everything with what ultimately would become the instructional materials center. So I started playing around with some ideas like this that were my best attempt at kind of representing a science kit, a kit for science. So we've got a beaker, we got a test tube over here. This guy here is supposed to be a milkweed, which is very commonly used thing for, science experiments and things, and a lot of properties of it. I don't know. I'm just kind of talking out my back end here on this one here because I don't know all the details of it, but it's definitely been a focus of what they have included in these science kits and stuff like that. So, and then you've got them all in this nice minimal box. So that was an option as well. And you can see a lot of the kind of references and similarities, like with the book, for instance. I tried to make the pages a sort of version of some of these fanned, feathered shapes from kind of that peacock reference. And then on the spine of the book here, we've got this little peacock eye, sort of a concentric circle shape there. So all trying to just tie it in, make it just feel of a piece with each other. And it's incredible, as different as these are, how you can get away with, just through the use of color and, maybe a few similar shapes and the same type choices. You can really make two things that are otherwise completely unrelated in a lot of ways feel very much of a piece with each other. So super fun. We also did a version where it's just the name done up just like the Compass Center, but with just our district branding, because this is not really its own separate campus in the way that the Compass Center is, but more like a district facility. So this is, one of our district Compass Rose logos set and locked up with the naming of the Instructional Materials Center that we might ultimately end up doing. This guy here is for one of the walls in the Instructional Materials Center. And even though we're probably going to go with this lockup for the branding of the facility, our pattern of fun illustrations makes its appearance here as the background for this wall. So this will be really, really cool to see in the space. But yeah, so we can kind of go back over here and see some of those things that I was playing with for the Instructional Materials Center. I was playing around with using that fan shape for the liquid in these beakers, and different ways of kind of representing that peacock eye in the book and things like that. Different approaches to the book, kind of very representative of the Compass stuff and the Compass Center logo, and especially some of the earlier iterations of it, right? So a lot of different ideas that were kind of explored with this one, ultimately to arrive at something that I feel like is very, very unique and will be very different from that visual style that, if you've been following along, that we've been kind of trying to create this sort of unified visual language of the comprehensive school campuses, the regular norm. We call them comprehensive schools. They're not really traditional schools. It doesn't really seem to fit, but comprehensive schools, that there's 6 of them, and based on where you are and whatever, they're not kind of like district wide campuses like our early college high school and things like that. So for those, we're kind of going for that unified visual look. This one is kind of a different, unique space that needed different approach and had different goals, right? This is also a brand new campus, brand new facility that is actually still under construction right now. And so there'll be a lot of focus on this one as it's actually opened in the fall. And so this one needed something pretty special and unique. And I think we really, really landed there. As far as my design responsibilities go, one of the cool things about being involved with this project and other ones, especially ones that are included in sort of the bond funded construction and remodeling phases of things, like this building. This building was funded by the bond election that we had in 2023. But with our department being involved pretty heavily in the meetings and everything that are happening around facilities like this, we're also able to kind of interject in some of the decisions that are being made there visually. And they've come to look to us for opinions on how to approach different things with these things. So one of the examples of that is for the signage on the outside. So this is the front of the Instructional Materials Center here, and this is the front of the Compass Center. And this was what they were planning on doing with the building signage. And so when I saw this, our bond communications specialist, who her name is Julie, she is awesome, and she's in all these meetings and kind of hearing what the plans are and everything, and offering feedback from our department's perspective, the school and community relations department. And so anytime she sees something where, especially visually or design wise, that things might be done in a better way or something that could be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, she immediately brings them back to me and says, hey, should we do something to help with this thing, whatever? Would you like to offer some feedback on that? And so that has been an incredible resource to not only have a hand in more things that are going to ultimately reflect on our district from a design standpoint, but also just to have opportunities where we really can help other departments that may not have seen us as a resource for those things in the past. So this was an obvious example where she brought this to me, and I was just like, yeah, that could be done better. You've got the namesake here on the same line as instructional, and then materials center down there. And on this one, the whole thing is on one because obviously it's shorter. It's a shorter name, and that's all fine and well, but if these are going to be on buildings that are on the same face and side by side, it makes a difference, right? And so I was like, okay, let me jump in here and see about some other ways we could approach this, right? So they have here letters shown at 24-inch height size on both buildings. So I'm like, okay, 24-inch height, that's 2 feet high, each of these letters. Do they all need to be the same size? Do they all need to be that large? Can we play with some sizing to create a sort of hierarchy of information here, right? And so what I did instead was propose these two options. It turns out these letters could probably have been whatever we want, but for the most cost-effective purpose, the sizes of that 24 inches, 2 feet, or 12 inches or 18 inches were kind of more standard sizes that would be, cost-wise, like there wouldn't be involving any custom building of these letters, things like that. So I laid them out with two different versions, one with the main name of the building itself in those 24-inch letters, and the namesakes done in a smaller size so that they could sort of create that hierarchy a little bit, right? The name of the building is the Instructional Materials Center and the Compass Center. So we wanted the namesakes on there, obviously, but there's a different, it's a different, part of that name, right? And so since they have that parity between them, they each have a namesake and then they each have an actual like building name. I figured lining them up or, laying them out in the same way would be a lot more effective and, would allow us to get the names on the same line, all that kind of stuff. So I laid these out with that in mind and did this with the namesakes being in 12 inches or 18 inches in conjunction with those 24-inch building name titles. So nothing crazy here, nothing like wildly, creative as far as the design itself goes, but just giving a little bit of input to save something from being different colors and different, phrasing or, what's on what line, right? Even if this one were Linda Lippy and then Instructional Materials Center, if that was all that I could convince them to change about this, that would be better, right? Same here. If they split Denise Geiger and Compass Center and everything was still the same size, whatever, it would be better. And it would be, a little bit more logical and make a little more sense as someone is in the parking lot reading these signs or whatever. They wouldn't feel like they were from two different planets, even though they are literally side by side and I can see them both at the same time. So things like that really matter and are things that not everybody who isn't looking at everything with a design mindset is going to think of when they look at it like this, where they're stacked on top of each other. Obviously, these buildings aren't going to be stacked on top of each other, right? But this is a nice way to fit it on a page of a spec, document or whatever, and a presentation to kind of just get the sign off on this thing, which is ultimately what someone is after with something like this. But when you start to think about it in the context that it's actually going to be in the real world, then, these kind of things matter. Making them so that they look like they belong next to each other and are related in some way, or at the very least were come up with by the same people, right, is important. So that was something that, that was small and quick for me to help with, but I think will make a huge impact at the end of the day. One other thing that I've been doing in relation to this particular project is there are several places, several little vestibules within the building of the Compass Center, at least, that I mentioned. We have this design going on a wall in the Instructional Materials Center. It's kind of like right as soon as you come into the building. And so we got that created for them. On the Compass Center side, we've actually got a lot of different little vestibules and stuff that will have artwork on them. And we went back and forth a lot on whether there should be artwork there, illustrations, things like that, whether there should be names or, of former graduates or investors, whatever, something like that, or whether they should just be photography. And ultimately, we landed on kind of this nature photography approach. And so we did a lot of kind of scaling up of some great images from the surrounding area in Cedar Park and Leander, which worked out great. But then also there is this big area just inside the entrance of the Compass Center where there's kind of this hall there, and there's a large wall above, kind of like a sort of tile half wall at the bottom that is also just open. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a perfect place for a mural if I can get them to, if I can convince them to let me do that. So I did get them to agree to that. And I will open up this compass center mural wall that I've been working on. And so this guy, let me get out of crop here so I can kind of come in here and look at some of this. This phrase here is something that this would be a good time to screenshot, Jack, if you're helping me out here in the Discord. If you guys aren't part of the Discord, by the way, join that Discord. There's a branding class group under the active shows section that we can share graphics in, and you can ask questions. I can give you feedback and all that kind of stuff. So with this guy, this "my life, my choice, my voice" is sort of a phrase that they've been using for things like t-shirts and stuff like that over the years. And so I thought that was really, really good and really could be particularly well suited for a space like this, where you're kind of like, you're coming in the building over here, you're coming through in here to the campus itself. Thank you, Jack, for including that that screenshot there. Let me bring this in just a smidge here. Okay. But yeah, so this is going to be like right when you come in to the building. And we've got all kinds of tie-in here. The logo for the campus itself. Thank you very much, Jack, for pointing people to the Discord as well. I wanted to definitely reference some of the branding. The branding is going to probably live on, vinyl decal on this door entrance, this kind of glass entrance door over here. But then other than that, it's not going to just be probably all over the building necessarily, right? So, and I didn't want to just have this be a logo wall where the logo that I made is just all over the wall here, or that it was just that, right? I wanted it to be able to have a message and everything, but also, again, feel like very much related to the space and its imagery and everything. So I took the pieces of the logo that we ended up creating and made some pattern out of it to kind of frame this piece and use as little end caps over here. And so this guy here is actually, from some of that work that we did in the exploration of the brand itself, where, let's see, it's in this guy here. So like some of these type of pieces, right? Didn't end up going that direction, but it's kind of like that even more direct representation, a little bit closer to a peacock feather shape than the ultimate, parallelogram type of shapes that we ended up using, right? And so no problem grabbing those and using them over here on our other design for this mural. Then we've got like literally just some concentric circles, or rounders, if you will, if you're like a design OG, that kind of represent that peacock eye, right? There's nothing blatantly peacock about any of this, but the colors tie into the colors used in the building, on the carpets and the paint and everything. And then we've got this great messaging here that is so important to them. So I'm going to be actually painting this mural. We might make some changes to the design a little bit to account for some things like, accessibility things, actually. A lot of the students here have different, different needs as far as, sensory things and whatever. And so the colors here, especially these bright greens that are pulled right from the branding and everything, but might be a little bit intense for some of the students that are going to be kind of coming through here every day. So that is an important thing to consider, and some great feedback that I got from the people at the campus who work with these students every day. And so that things like that will probably change. We might, soften some of the lettering that I've done here to be a little bit less rigid and be a little bit more flowing. But otherwise, something like this in this shape and a great visual representation and tie-in to the branding and everything will be right there in the front of this building, and is going to really set that space off and make it just like a wonderful place to enter and come and do this very important learning that this program facilitates. And so super excited to have been a part of all of this throughout the process here, and it's still ongoing. So stay tuned for more on that stuff as well. But yeah, so this is some of the extra stuff that I've been working on. One of the great extra projects we looked earlier on in this series at some of the graduation programs that I'd done, where I wasn't developing any branding really for those. A lot of that branding already exists. It's for these 6 comprehensive high school campuses that already have their branding and stuff. We are working on rebranding a couple of them, but not in time for getting on these programs and stuff. So that was an unrelated to branding project that I was able to work on. And another thing we're working on currently is a summer publication that we're going to put out as part of a new enrollment marketing campaign that we're doing, and that will involve a lot of different design and working with the actual district branding in that case, where we will kind of use, let's see, I've got, is it in this guy? But yeah, we've got the district branding here. I'll open this guy up. When I first came in, one of the things that I needed to definitely do before driving myself crazy was work on the actual compass rose itself. This was the original compass rose when I started here in December. Strong mark, obviously, right? Great colors. I don't generally go for doing like multicolored logos like this, especially like that create a lot of dimension, where losing it can be kind of structurally like detrimental to the overall conveying of the meaning of it, right? But I felt like it could, at the very least, it could be a little bit more constructionally sound, if you will. So I made some changes and made it this guy here. So nothing wildly different about it, right? Still got the same ring around here with the same dividers and everything, but just made it a little bit more realistic, or a little bit more like something like this would normally be built. With this one, it was clearly like one of these shapes was created and then duplicated and rotated beneath it, and then same thing back here, where things kind of like don't have that rotational symmetry that you might expect in a design like this of a compass rose. So I kind of made some of those tweaks and kind of did it not in secret, but kind of did it just for me at first. And then after I started to kind of like introduce it a little bit here and there subtly, it kind of like, once it was known that I had done it and it was in existence, it kind of took off and has now been, planned to be poured into a custom terrazzo floor at a new performing arts center and everything. So, so things like that, or like little small behind the scenes things that I've been working on and doing to improve things. This here is the sort of one color version of it. This is the before, kind of, a direct representation of that guy, right? But in one color form. And then this was my cleanup of that. And this one was particularly tricky because I wanted these corners to meet in the middle here, right? But then that can cause like some trouble when you get out here, where having this like directly at the halfway point of this particular arm of the compass rose doesn't actually look as balanced as it normally, as you would hope. And so there's a lot of like subtle geometry tweaking in here to make it look a little bit more visually appealing and have it work a little bit better. Also with a rotationally symmetric design like this, you can start to have an effect where it looks like it's not straight, right? So even though it is perfectly level and straight or whatever, because of the way that things are aligned, it kind of looks like it's either got some rotational motion to it, or at the very least is like slightly off level, right? So I made a lot of little tiny tweaks in there on that front to kind of improve and prevent some of that from happening, and just make it overall a more sound mark for use on all kinds of things where the one color version is needed. So yeah, so those guys are going to be playing a major role in some of our upcoming marketing stuff, and we'll probably look at some of that next week, as well as some of the updates that I've made recently on some of the branding for one of our campuses, Leander High School. I will open this up to say goodbye to you guys. Ignore all my things here. This was the lion. Actually, that was the lion without the teeth. This is where we got with the teeth. And then there was some feedback about this guy looking like he has a mullet, which I understand. Didn't necessarily agree that it looked like that per se, but could understand the feedback of it. And I actually really, really like the way that we solved for that and improved it. And so these are some of the options that we're going with next that I just presented to them this morning. And we'll see how that goes. So we'll talk about that next week as well. In the meantime, you guys are awesome. We're starting to get a little bit more active in the chat and in the Discord. Definitely go join in there. And, feel free to pop in there and ask any questions that you might have for next week, things you'd like to see. And we will take all that and have an awesome time once again next week, Wednesday, same time, 9 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. my time and Central time here. And until then, be cool, you guys. Check out all the other awesome shows on Adobe Live. And thanks for joining. See you guys soon.